The future. There was a past, there is a present, and there will inevitably be a future. But what that looks like will always be a prevailing mystery, and has motivated mankind ever since civilization began. From religion to sports analysis, presidential campaigns, and sci-fi movies, the way we look towards the future is directly correlated to how we see ourselves in the present. Oftentimes, these predictions and visualizations turn out to be wildly inaccurate, and particularly when it comes to art, can be more works of fiction than anything else, simply just exploring the extents of the open-ended nature of the future. However, even if unintentional, we often manifest our own future through these seemingly inconsequential interpretations. As the saying goes, life often imitates art. What do I mean by that exactly? And being a city planning and architecture channel, what does this have to do with all that? Well, let me take you back to 1927, when the iconic film Metropolis was released. The film is famous for its breathtaking art direction, grand sets, and directing that was ahead of its time, with the very architecture of the metropolis playing a central role in the theme and plot of the film. In this depiction of a futuristic city, the working class lived below the surface, in dark, plain, and what we now call modernist-style tower blocks that oppressed the masses. Remember that in the real world in 1927, classical architecture and urban design was as alive as ever, even in the wake of the First World War. Cities across the West, from San Francisco to Detroit, Pittsburgh, and Berlin, were cities that design-wise were in their heydays, with the City Beautiful movement having major influence, and urban areas racing to build out their elaborate subway and streetcar networks, with many of the buildings, neighborhoods, and parks built at this time remaining as some of the most iconic to this day. To a 1927 audience, to see people living in a place like this would have been horrifying. Back to the film. Above the surface is the Grand City, towering in a way that even Manhattan can only dream of, and is where the wealthy and business class live. There are elements of Art Deco in the architecture which gives it that feel of splendor and even beauty that differentiates it from the worker city, indicating that it is the home of the privileged. However, there is something quite off and dehumanizing about it. The design is daunting and the scale is overpowering. Again, looking at real-life 1927, the tallest building in the world at that time was New York's Woolworth Building, which is a masterpiece. You see that there is ample detail, ornamentation, art, and is highly connected to the street and pedestrians with its beautiful storefronts and grand entrance. And looking towards the Art Deco creations of the 1930s, the Chrysler Building and Rockefeller Center also managed to have a lot of craftsmanship, detail, and cultured art that enriches the people amongst it, while also, especially in the case of the Rockefeller Center, making a space for the people that is both beautiful and inviting. When it comes to Metropolis, they are deliberately removing these positive elements. The buildings are grand and impressive, but lack any ornamentation, depth, or human scale, except for perhaps way up above, as far away from the street as possible, once again on purpose, showing that in this society, the people don't matter. And of course, the city's lack of public space is quite apparent, with no squares or sidewalks anywhere to be seen. The film is conveying through this architecture that while there are some beautiful and impressive elements to it, that as a society that lacks values, morality, and care for the rest of the population, its buildings reflect that in a way that looks dull, oppressive, and eerie. So then, in the beautiful classical world of the late 1920s, audiences are presented with a vision of the future that shows the tyrannical, brutal nature of modernist planning and aesthetic in quite the demonstrable way. And yet, just a few decades later, this is the exact way in which we decided to build our cities, homes, and streets. What the filmmakers used to depict the underground hell of the metropolis' slave class was then actually embraced by the most influential architects and planners of the next several decades. What was used to shock and horrify was now being presented as fresh and equitable by people like Le Corbusier, Robert Moses, I.M. Pei, Van der Rohe, and Louis Kahn. And not to mention the infinite number of unknown architects who have followed in their footsteps and all contributed to building the ugly modern world, where so many people feel alienated and crushed by the cities and towns of today. Just like how audiences would have imagined such a world watching Metropolis in 1927. But this trend has only continued through the decades. 1976's Logan's Run presents a utopian dystopia, where people wear colorful clothes in the comfortable domed city and live a hedonistic lifestyle that seems to make everyone very happy. But in reality, there is total uniformity and dehumanization, with the material lifestyle distracting from the fact that there is no art, philosophy, history, family, or any actual culture or sustainable society, with the all-ruling computer dictating every facet of life. The architecture and design of the city in which these people live this entrapped, isolated, fractional existence is therefore very important. What you get are these separated, far beyond human scale modernist towers with interiors that look pretty much like your average mall, but maybe just a bit more glowy, and mixed in with these weird rooms like this one. Yet somehow there is a sense of relatability to this dystopia, and it's because it is so strikingly similar to American suburbia. Modernist towers, malls, no streets, home sweet home for people who grew up this way, and when it comes to North America, that's quite a lot of people. And with this film coming out in the mid-1970s, this shows you how even then, at the height of this type of building in the real world, people knew how anti-human this was. Victor Gruen, the inventor of the shopping mall, in 1978 came out and said that they had ruined cities. And yet our architects and city planners saw this and insisted on continuing to subject us to this sort of development. Ridley Scott's Blade Runner 1982 brings us a more near-future depiction, and not in a good way. Of course, the movie itself is a classic and well worth the watch, but their version of 2019 Los Angeles is one that is ugly, chaotic, dirty, and with no regard for beauty, history, or tranquility. Kind of like the LA of today. Jokes aside, pretty much every modern city in the last 30 to 40 years since Blade Runner has developed in this direction. Buildings have gone larger and taller, with lighting and technology that is very impressive, but with more of an emphasis on how things look at night rather than during the day, which is when people are actually going about their lives. And of course, cities have gone much dirtier, cluttered, and disorderly as this has been happening, further disconnecting us from our past. And of course, there's a uniformity to it as well. Even though the film takes place in Los Angeles, they could have easily said it was Chicago or Denver or Houston without changing a thing, and it would have been just as believable. And this goes hand in hand with how basically every modern city's downtown essentially looks the same. Not even from one American city to another, but from country to country, with places like Warsaw, Xi'an, and Lagos all going down the exact same path. While it makes for an extremely interesting setting for the film, and in 1982 would have been absolutely stunning and bewildering to see, at no point is the city actually meant to be a desirable future. Except if you're a Yimbyist, perhaps. But to the previous point, this is why when it comes to Blade Runner 2049, the 2017 sequel, suddenly this dystopian setting for the present-day audience is less shocking than it would have been in 1982, as at this point it's more of an outgrowth of what we already have in today's world. But to be fair, this aesthetic is already starting to become outdated, as Metropolis and Logan's Run have already become dated. But hold on, let's just think about this for a second. The futuristic worlds these films depict are outdated. How does that make any sense? When you understand the true nature of architecture and design, this is all very much crystal clear. Classical architecture, meaning architecture that uses classical principles, is the key to making great places and beautiful buildings. The classical principles reflect what we see in nature and therefore on a deep psychological level bring us a sense of comfort and familiarity. Additionally, they are built on the human scale, constantly stimulating and inviting people at the street level, bringing us together in an organic way, increasing quality of life dramatically and in a way that is truly timeless. Look at this video of this young woman reacting to the Cologne Cathedral. Do you think people make that face when they see some random skyscraper like this? No chance. Even though this building is much larger and functionally is more complex and technical, if it were torn down and replaced, hardly anyone would bat an eye. But the Cologne Cathedral invigorates awe after centuries, and will continue to forever. Just like any other grand classical building of all different styles, shapes, and sizes that draw people from all over the world. The same could hardly be said for futuristic modern developments. This is because modernism desperately breaks all of the classical principles in order to be different, to shock, and in the moment have a visceral effect for its audience. This works astonishingly well for movies when these buildings are only on display for entertainment and to propel a narrative, allowing the audience to fully encapsulate themselves in the strange world of the film they are watching. But this simply doesn't translate well into real life, where we have to go about our daily lives, and at a natural pace, not a director's cut. meaning that as hard as we may try to find a new formula, we are human beings after all, and therefore we are hardwired to respond well to certain ways of building and designing and respond negatively to others. We don't want to live in plain, isolating, overbearing, chaotic, or uniform places that are firmly disconnected from our past and our culture. The legacies our ancestors had left for us through these buildings and cities are truly incredible, and they will always remain desirable, important places. But this doesn't mean we have to be stuck in the past. The future can be exciting, new, and even an improvement over the past. But there's no reason to, in that pursuit, subvert the things we know work so effectively well in making for timeless, beautiful, and culturally enriching places. Just look at the Art Deco and Mayan revival movements in the US through the 1920s and 30s. These were new, innovative styles that left such an important footprint in American life that has lasted till this day, showing that right up until the modernist takeover in the post-war era, that the classical principles continue to succeed in allowing creativity and revolutionary concepts to thrive, all the while not departing from the principles that ensure quality, enjoyability, and respect to cultural heritage. So how should we envision our future? Well, initially I think it would be nice for us to take a step back, undo the damage that quote futurism, really modernism, has caused in our cities and towns, and rediscover the magic of the classical building traditions in order to bring life back into our cities. But beyond that, well, just take a look at some of these incredible artists' depictions. And with that, thank you so much for watching. But before we go, a shout out to my first Patreon member who, for acquiring the Master Architect tier, gets one, my dad. Let's hope I can add to that list soon. And if you're interested in increasing your support for this channel, contributing to the architectural revival / New Urbanist cause, it would be immensely appreciated if you join my Patreon page. Check it out in the link below to learn more about what perks and opportunities joining comes with. And once again, thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time.